Can people hear us?
Can people hear? Can people hear me?
Not sure how many people are here, so I think we'll just hang out for a little bit. Hello!
Hi.
Until we see that people are sort of coming in.
Be forewarned, we have zero idea what we're doing.
Yay!
Oh
Hi,
my god,
everyone!
there's
Ah!
people. This is terrifying. Oh,
Hello!
oh no, they're already so sweet.
So, this is my friend Kira.
Hello. And this is my friend Naomi.
Hello! We just decided this morning that we were going to read this aloud together, and we thought we might as well do it as a stream and have people
We
join
planned
us.
this. Yes, we planned it in, as Naomi likes to call it, a fever dream. So this is not thoroughly planned.
Yes, when I say this morning, I do mean 3 a.m. Also, pronouns. Mine are, I'm essentially a chocolate bar. I'm her, she, or she, her.
Yep, I also use she, her pronouns.
So we can. Do you want to start, Kira, or do you want me to start first?
Sure, I'll give it a go. Let's get a vibe check. Oh,
yeah, we were gonna do just like have one person reading a certain chunk and then switch off. Oh, I do like the idea of doing different voices. Maybe we can try that another time after we practiced a little bit more.
Listen,
I don't know if
a
my
wee
brain
bit
could handle
nervous.
that. Yeah, a little bit.
We'll try our best.
Yeah, definitely.
Wait, I thought we were doing whole chapters, or are we still doing the chunk change off?
What do people think? Do we think that a whole chapter of one person reading would be too long? Or would people prefer just to go through the whole chapter? My personal thought, we did sort of a test read of a chapter where we switched off after little bits, and I did like that.
Okay.
It gave a nice little break for commentary. Cool. Awesome. Sounds good.
All right.
All right.
Let's get started then.
Yeah.
Are we ready, folks?
I think so.
All right, this is Salvage by MuffinLance, a delightful author who we adore.
Yes.
Okay. Chapter 1, Contrary Corpse. Body, Tillich said, with the casualness of a man who'd spent all night tacking around the edge of a storm and didn't have much emotional range left over for some other crew's misfortune. The morning had dawned bright and cheerful and near windless, the clouds breaking up behind them. Hakoda wasn't usually a man to spectate on death, but he was already leaning on the rail, letting the sun soak into his wet clothes. So he cracked an eye and watched the body drift past. It was smaller than he'd hoped to see. Not a child, but not a man grown. Arms cut over a bit of flotsam. Pale, Fire Nation pale, or drowned pale, it didn't much matter anymore. He heard one of the others mutter a prayer to the ocean spirit. As if to be contrary, the corpse chose that moment to squint open its eyes. The scar on his face turned the bleary stare into a glare. Throw him a line, Hakoda ordered, because it suddenly mattered very much whether the kid was Fire Nation or just pale with cold. The boy didn't call out for help. That should have been the first sign of what Hakoda was getting his crew into.
I like how he's like
Zuko.
barely conscious, and still his like first instinct is to glare.
Listen, he has some character traits, and his glare is definitely one of the most important. Okay. Zuko shouldn't have been on deck in the storm. That was Pohai. Oh boy, there's a word we didn't practice saying.
I think it's Pohai.
Pohai. Okay. That was Pohai's stronghold, less than a day behind him and 2 hours of sleep in him, and a helmet firmly shoved over his head so Uncle couldn't see the darkening bruise the Yuyan's arrow had left. For the last storm they'd been in, the Avatar had been in too, and do you think we could have been friends? His heart hurt, in the cold air helped, and if traveling during storms to avoid detection was the Avatar's new strategy, then Zuko needed to know. No one was particularly concerned when the wave hit. This wasn't as bad as the last storm they'd weathered, and even if their prince was stupidly standing in the center of the deck, as was his stupid princely right, they were all used to Zuko's reflexes. So was Zuko. But he'd nearly dislocated his shoulder the other week, breaking Helman Kyo's fall from the tower. He pulled a half-healed muscles with all his blue spirit training last night. And when his hand closed over the ship's rail, he couldn't hold on. And then he was in the storm waves, wearing metal armor. Everyone was a lot more concerned then. You want to pick up, Naomi?
Yeah. Gold eyes, Tuluk reported, as he patted the kid's back. The boy continued to hack up salt water on their deck. Could be from that colony ship we spotted the other day, one of the crewmen offered, with a shrug. Isn't that what their soldiers wear under armor? Another said, fingering the knife on his belt. That was the detail Hakoda's eyes had settled on as well. If a colonial or half-breed were wearing clothes like that, he'd better have a very satisfying explanation. The boy paused for breath. Tuluk gave him another thump, and the water kept coming. The crew tossed Zuko a line almost before he'd hit the water himself. It didn't help when he couldn't reach it. As much as he swam, the only direction he went was down. He clawed at the buckles and straps of his armor. It was meant to be put on for the help of the others, but if his crew had taught him anything, it was that if he wanted things done, he had to do them himself. He'd done this alone plenty of times, but every heartbeat he spent working at a shoulder buckle was another he spent sinking. Why weren't his fingers moving faster? Little young for a soldier, isn't he? You know their boys don't age the same as ours. I swear, these people look 20 until they're 70. The young soldier didn't seem to be following the conversation above his head. For the moment, he seemed content to fold over on his knees and gasp in the first few unobstructed breaths. He was shivering, but not as much as he should be. It was never a good sign when they stopped shivering. Oh, no. Zuko swam the opposite direction from the one his breastplate had sunk, or tried to. Thought he did. He could feel the waves pushing at him, but every direction was gray, and he didn't know how much longer he could hold his breath. As long as he needed to. It was just air. He wasn't going to be weak about it. He broke the surface, took in a breath, and got slapped with a face full of rain. He couldn't see his ship. Where was his ship? Zuko! Uncle was yelling. Uncle shouldn't sound like that. Zuko turned. The deck was farther than it had been, but it was fine. He'd make it. Which was, of course, when the next wave crested over his head. Hakoda crouched down. Oh, you go.
Okay. Hakoda crouched down, caught the young soldier's chin in his hand, and made the boy look up. Tuluk had said his eyes were gold, but that's what they called all fire-blooded eyes, the muddy yellows and burnt oranges, the dark ambers. Hakoda hadn't been prepared for gold, like the actual metal, brighter than a wolf bear's and even more unnatural for it. It was a predator's gaze, not a human's. Are you Fire Nation? He asked, even though it was a redundant question looking into those eyes. Of course I am, the boy said, like he had too much pride in that nation of murderers to even dream of denying it, which sent him off coughing again before Hakoda could ask his next question. So, are you a soldier was probably a bit too redundant too. The ship was even further away when Zuko found the surface again. He wasn't as sure he could make it, not with the rest of his armor still weighing him down, the boots and wrist guards making every movement slow and heavy, trying to pull him under with every stroke, and the current was against him, dragging him back. He had to get the rest off, or he'd never be able to catch up. Zuko! He could barely make Uncle out on the deck, or the crewmen holding the old general back. Good. The crew had better keep him safe. Uncle needed to stop those near screams, stop acting like Zuko wasn't right here, and he wouldn't be right back. He came back from Po-Hai Stronghold. He wasn't going to let a few splashes stop him. He took a breath, prepared himself this time for the weight to drag him under while he wrestled against waterlogged leather straps. When he surfaced again, he couldn't see the Wani. Uncle! Rain, thunder, the crash of waves, his own shouts. No, Uncle.
No. Yes, Uncle. Yes, Uncle, please, actually.
Please come back, Uncle. I
yes.
Will. Please.
Yes, Uncle, all the time.
Okay, you want to start?
Sure. He's probably not a firebender, at least, Tuluk joked, because that was the sort of thing Tuluk would joke about in front of a kid whose face was half burned off. Yes, I am, the soldier promptly corrected, his rough voice managing to both be dazed and affronted, which was about the time Hakoda started paying attention as much as, which was about the time Hakoda started paying as much attention to the recent dark bruise of a head wound as he'd been paying to the scar. The hypothermia couldn't have been helping either. Well, that was very honest, Tuluk said, patting the kid again. Behind him, another crewman made a not-so-subtle gesture, a glance to the ocean, a touch to his sword, a raised eyebrow towards Hakoda. Zuko didn't know where he found the driftwood, any more than he knew how long his breath of fire held out. Not long enough. He felt cold. Cold, like its own kind of fire that pricked and burned, made him shiver so hard his muscles convulsed, made them hurt. He wasn't trying to swim anymore, wasn't trying to make it to the tops of the waves in the hopes of spotting the Wani. He was just holding on. He couldn't feel himself holding on anymore. His fingers were thick and distant and weird. He shook his sash free, kept one hand of it in his mouth because he could still feel things between his teeth, tied himself to the driftwood as best as he could by sight and not feel. At least he wasn't as cold anymore. The waves were dying down and the ocean was getting warmer, which wasn't how oceans worked, part of him knew. But what good would it do to think about that when it made him cold again? He could just be warm for a while, rest, get his fire back. He'd figure out what to do when he woke up. He jerked awake at sunrise. There was a ship on the horizon, not the Wani. When he opened his eyes again, it was much closer. People were staring down at him. He should say something. He should glare, probably, is what he should do. The sun was up, but his inner flame was still out, and he was too warm, and he didn't know where Uncle or his crew were, and maybe these people could help. Nobody ever wanted to help him, though. It'd break my heart instantly. Oh, no. A rope.
I forgot how sad this part of this thing was.
I know. It's very... it just gets you, huh? It gets you right in your little heart.
It sure does.
Oh, boy.
Like a nice big punch in the old blood pumper.
Yep. That's what I always say. A rope splashed down near him in an extremely contradictory fashion. An arm span from him, an impossible distance to cross. He was good with impossible. Zuko narrowed his eyes, fumbled at the knot in his sash until it released him from the driftwood and pushed off. He sank, of course, but he sank towards the rope, whose end was sinking too, and once he got hold of it, he just didn't let go. He had a lot of practice, focusing on one task until it almost killed him. He wasn't as good at holding his breath as he'd been at the start of this all, but he didn't let go, and he didn't die before they realized they should be pulling him up. And then he was on a wooden deck, not metal, and somebody was making him let go of the rope. He didn't want to. He needed to not let go. That was important, wasn't it? And somebody else was hitting him on the back hard enough to jar his ribs and also cause about half the ocean to come out of his lungs.
This boy truly is supernatural in his tenacity.
He has determination, and that's what we love about him and for him, and my heart goes out to this little boy. Do you want to pick up, Kira?
Yeet. Theirs wasn't the sort of ship that kept prisoners for long. A kid as young as this was little more than a new recruit. He might not have done as much wrong as others in his country, might not have gotten the chance to do any wrongs at all. But he wouldn't know anything useful either. They weren't going to torture a child for fun, any more than they were going to let a firebender soldier bunk with them until the next port. Sword, Hakoda decided, meeting his crewman's gaze as he briefly touched his own. The man nodded and started unsheathing his blade, quiet as he could. The kid had escaped the ocean. It would have been cruel to throw him back. He was young. They'd make it quick. Zuko didn't like that one guy kept hitting him. Didn't like that the other guy grabbed his face. Didn't like that they kept talking over him like he was a fish they'd netted, not a person. Didn't like that they were wearing blue, not red. Didn't like that he was on his knees when he heard steel being unsheathed behind him, quiet as the blue spirit's own blades. He knew they weren't going to help. No one ever did. But he always fell for it every time.
And that's
the boy
worse.
Shrugged.
Oh, that breaks my heart even more. Damn it.
The boy shrugged Philip's hand off his back and struggled to his feet. The other crewman kept his blade in check, waiting on a clean kill. That would necessitate less waddling. Hakoda would order the kid held still if he needed to, but the soldier clearly had something to say. and it didn't hurt to indulge him. My name is Prince Zuko, son of Ursa and Fire Lord Ozai. If you're going to execute me, do it while I'm on my feet, you cowards. Didn't hurt at all. The man who'd grabbed Zuko's chin stood as well and looked down on him with as much careful calculation as Azula or Zhao or father. Do it, Zuko growled, because he couldn't remember how he'd gotten his legs to work well enough to be standing. He wasn't sure how long he could keep it up. Tuluk, take him down to the healer. Chief, the man who kept hitting Zuko's back said, without much inflection. We'll deal with it if he lives, the chief said. Zuko would live, if only to spite them. He was good at that. Way too good at making Uncle worry.
Way too good at making Uncle worry. Jeez. That's his specialty, baby. Oh,
sure
man.
is, but we love him for it.
He said, I'm gonna make you worry even more than normal, and I'm gonna make you think I'm dead, and that's great. That's a perfectly fine thing for a nephew to do, you darn little guy.
Listen, he has years and years of emotional abuse and trauma and also so much angst.
He does have a lot of angst. I really like that first chapter. It the choppiness, or not necessarily choppiness, but the quick pacing in between the other two is just really hooks you in.
Like they hooked Zuko.
Okay. All right. You get a little, you little jokester, you.
That's me. I joke about someone else dying. Yikes.
It's fine.
It's fine.
It's a coping mechanism. It's a living.
Sure is.
All right. Chapter 2.
Okay, wait, before we get started, vibe check again? How people feeling? Any suggestions for how to proceed?
Vibe check. Feel free to hit us. It's fine.
I mean, kindly, though.
I do see a smiley face, so that's cool. Awesome.
Seeing am happy.
Am happy. Love to hear it.
Nope. Is that nope for the hitting or nope for the vibe check?
Nope for the vibe check. Doing great. Love it. Awesome. Cool.
All right. Let's go.
We continue on, because this does have the best chapter name. I mean, they all do. But Chapter 2, the captive is made primarily of sharp elbows.
Mwah, so good.
Mwah. Delicious. All of those sharp elbows.
More than two of them.
Yes. More than, well, it's like one of those drawings of biblically accurate angels where it's 1,000 wings and eyes. It's just 1,000 elbows. 1,000 elbows.
Or maybe it's all of the metaphorical elbows, because Zuko's got a lot of metaphorical sharp elbows, you know?
That is true. He is a metaphorical porcupine of sharp elbows. If that makes sense. Anyway.
I hate that image. I hate that image so much.
Let's keep going. Let's pretend that didn't happen.
We'll pretend that didn't happen.
Yeah.
It's fine.
They didn't have steel cuffs or a brig. No spare rooms they could convert into a holding cell. No medicines that could safely interfere with firebending. Healer Kusta had been as to the marrow honest as he could be. He had a few things that might have worked on an earthbender or a waterbender, but they affected control. The last thing they needed was a firebender with control problems. All they had was flammable rope, and the hammock his second-in-command had left empty in the crew cabin. Hakoda closed his eyes, pressed his fingers to his temples, and tried not to wish death on a teenager. But life in the Antarctic bred practicality, and it would be convenient if the boy didn't make it. Certainly more convenient than the alternative. They were on a wooden spirits-damned ship. Scuttles nosed at his hand. Hakoda absent-mindedly scratched under the edges of the isopop's carapace and opened his eyes on another problem, rather related, the blank parchment on his desk. How did a man go about writing a ransom note to the Fire Lord? Another problem he wouldn't have to deal with if... if. There was a knock on his door. Tuluk came in. "How's our passenger?" Hakoda asked. "He's a charming little badger viper," Hakoda's third-in-command, acting second, replied. "Kusta's not sure whether he'll make it." The Fire Prince had managed to stay standing, stiff-necked with arrogance, until he'd gotten below deck. He'd collapsed just as soon as he'd left the crew's eyes behind him, and needed to be carried the rest of the way. Fire Nation pride at its finest. Scuttles clawed at his pant leg, ever hopeful for lap time. Hakoda brushed the dog's parapods away. Is he awake? You think that's stopping him? Tuluk's half-smile wasn't reaching his eyes, and never had. Chief, we don't have any way to keep a firebender, unless you fancy dipping him in the ocean now and again and making hypothermia a more permanent condition. He'd thought of it. Rumor had it that the Fire Nation kept waterbending prisoners from water and earthbenders on metal rigs at sea. Why couldn't they keep a firebender away from heat? He didn't need Kira to tell him the prince wouldn't survive that kind of treatment. He'd seen the boy kneeling on his deck, too tired to shiver. We'll deal with it if he lives, he repeated. The phrase lived at the back of his mind now. If he can't behave himself, we know how to handle firebenders. Tuluk made the kind of non-committal noise that would have been an argument with Bato. His acting second let the issue drop. Why don't you take a turn with him, if Ake hasn't strangled the kid yet? Ake had not, in fact, strangled the kid, but he looked close to changing his mind. The two of them were wedged into the bunk in the healer's room, under a pile of thick blankets and furs. The crewman took up most of the space. The firebender looked smaller in every possible comparison. Shorter, thinner, younger. With his eyes closed and that scar, he almost looked like a victim of this war, rather than one of its perpetrators. Interesting. Funny. Who would have thought that? Who would have thought that maybe this war doesn't help people? Anyways. Ake had the makings of a black eye. Hakoda couldn't remember, and the scowl of a man much put upon. It's Ayake? Okay. Cool. We will adjust. Ayake had the makings of a black eye Hakoda couldn't remember, and the scowl of a man much put upon. It's not too late to toss him back, Chief. But you both looked so comfortable, Hakoda grinned. On the other side of the room, which implied a greater distance than the cramped space actually provided, Hirlakusta snorted. Tuluk tells me we accidentally fished out a badger viper. Tuluk rigged the draw so he wouldn't get the short straw, Ake groused. You try sleeping next to this thing. That was the plan, Hakoda said. He couldn't help but think Ayake's, Ayake? Now that's the question. Ake? Ake. Okay, definitive answer, Ake.
Cool.
You
heard it from the author herself. Can't complain with that.
Can't argue with that. Ake groused. Try sleeping next to this thing. That was the plan, Hakoda said. He couldn't help but think Ake's relief was more dramatic than one unconscious teenager warranted, Fire Nation or not. The boy made a sort of half-protest, squirming sleepily as Ake shed blanket layers as fast as a man could. All yours, Chief, he grinned. Remember, Hirlakusta said, don't jostle him too much or let him overexert himself again. The last thing we need is for cold blood to come back towards his heart too fast. I've helped with hypothermia before, Kusta, Hakoda reminded the man, kicking off his boots. Ake was still grinning. Kusta was paying attention to some teapot concoction he was brewing in a far too deliberate manner. Hakoda spared a suspicious glance at them both before sliding into the blanket nest. The bedding was warm from Ake's body heat, but the kid was a spirit's damned ice cube. They'd stripped him of his clothes. They were dripping over in a pile in the corner. If Hakoda hadn't felt the shallow rise and fall of the teenager's chest, he'd have thought he was sidled up to a corpse. The soldier was on his side. Hakoda tucked an arm around him and held back a shiver. Ake was still grinning, and leaning against the doorframe like he was expecting a show. Which was the point Ozai's spawn shot an elbow into Hakoda's gut. Hakoda caught the other arm before it could slam back into his face. Don't let him move too much, Hirlakusta reminded him. A warning, as much as it was medical advice. It's too warm, the prince protested, and kicked backwards with precision accuracy at Hakoda's kneecap. He'd never had to pin down a hypothermia victim before. A little more gently, if you would. We found hugging him to be effective. Hugging him? It's medicinal, Kusta said, with a twitch of lips under his beard. That was the moment I fell in love with Kusta. Ake was still grinning. Get to work, Hakoda ordered, unless you'd like to trade back. I'll tell the men of your tales of your noble sacrifice, chief, the man said, beating a smug retreat. The boy squirmed weakly, his heartbeat erratic under Hakoda's palms. His predator's eyes were open again and half-focused, his face twisted into a scowl. You want me to hug him? Hakoda repeated, casting another glance at the ship's healer. Kusta was pouring a cup of something that smelled surprisingly good. And get him sitting up while you're at it. You wanna pick up?
Okay. Zuko was too warm, and people wouldn't stop touching him, and they wouldn't let him get out from under the blankets. And the blankets were weird and furry. The bed was more comfortable than his usual old futon and higher off the ground. And the walls were made of wood, which was just a fire hazard, was what it was. And it felt like maybe these facts should be coming together to make something more, but he didn't feel so good, and Uncle was here. Maybe it was okay to just let his head keep spinning for a while. Come on, Prince Zuko. Tea. I don't want any more of your stupid tea, Uncle. But you're going to drink it anyways. Such a polite nephew you are. Fine, Zuko said, and he tried to take the cup, but it was all clattery heavy in his hands. If Uncle wasn't helping him hold it, he never would have been able to get it to his lips. It burned his throat going down. It was too hot. But Uncle made him take another swallow before letting him breathe. He thinks you're his uncle, said the thing he was leaning against, which was a person who was holding him around the waist, like he couldn't sit up on his own. It was too hot. Zuko elbowed the man in the ribs. This led to the man wrapping himself around Zuko's arms too. What did he think he was doing? Zuko stomped on his foot, and then the man shook him a little, which made it a lot harder to breathe. He missed whatever growled words the man said into his ear because he was too busy trying to remember when Uncle had changed his beard style. It was less pointy. He's a bit out of it, Uncle said. Makes him easier to handle. Now I feel sorry for his real uncle. Apparently he's fat and lazy and makes terrible, stupid tea. His uncle is the Dragon of the West. Ah, I'll stop feeling sorry for him then. They deserve each other. Come on, Prince Zuko, a little more. Zuko groaned with appropriate levels of tea-related drama. Love him, but drank the rest of the cup. Why are your eyes blue? I'm trying something new, Uncle said. You like it? This is weird, Zuko decided after a moment. He wanted to yell at Uncle not to buy random things they didn't need, and there'd been nothing wrong with his old eye color. He didn't need a new one. But yelling took a lot of energy, and just sitting up was really hard, even with the stupid guy behind him still touching him. His head lolled forward, and the world went dark, probably because his eyes weren't staying open anymore. Tired. Go ahead and lay him back down, Chief. He'll be out of it for a while. Tea? No, that was just Cloudberry, trying to get him warmed up from the inside, too. He's not doing well, Chief. He's cold even for a firebender, for a non-bender. For a firebender. I'll be fine, Uncle, Zuko said into his pillow. He was on a pillow again. And the horrible furry blankets were suffocating him, and the man was a furnace behind him, but his arms were being held against his sides, and everything was too heavy to try moving. He'd just rest here a little bit. You worry too much. There was a hand on his forehead again then, and it didn't seem like the right size, but everything else about it was right. That's an uncle's privilege, you brat.
Yeah. Also, cloudberry tea is delicious. I would highly recommend.
Wait, that's a real thing?
Yeah.
What? When?
Since a very long time. It's not like a popular flavor. I think the last time I actually had it was like we found it in a museum. I don't know. It was at like a museum gift shop, and God, remember those? But yeah, we love Kusta, a very good uncle surrogate. Always ready to jump into that uncle privilege of worrying.
Oh, I love him. I love him so much.
Love.
All right.
Kusta pulled his hand back slowly, shook it out a little, like he wasn't quite sure what he'd been doing with it. He sat back down and moved the teapot back on its little burner, keeping it warm for the next time the soldier woke up. Hakoda, meanwhile, tried to ignore the collection of bruises he'd gotten since coming within range of the little fire prince. How the kid could fumble a teacup but still have energy left over for spontaneous assault baffled him. He settled back down behind the little snake and preemptively wrapped his arms around the kid to catch his wrists. It wasn't a hug, just basic tactics against a half-dead teenager. If the boy did live, he was going to be a nightmare. If. That if continued to hang in the air as the kid fell back into the too slow pulse and too shallow breathing of earlier. There was something around the boy's wrist. Hakoda idly traced it under the covers. It was still a little damp from the waves and a little salt-crusted at the edges when it had begun to dry, but smooth and fine underneath that. It was like one of the ribbons women of his own tribe would wear for a necklace. A lover's token, perhaps? The prince was the right age to have some sweetheart waiting for him, possibly the future Fire Lady. Strange to think that the short frame tucked up next to him, his, belonged to the future Fire Lord. Maybe some good would come from his stay on their ship. If they treated him fairly, would he remember that would he remember that when he was on the throne? Or would he only remember the humiliation of being held captive by those his own people called savages? Would he gain respect for their culture? Or only a more personal reason to tear it apart? More things to consider, if the boy lived. If. There was a pendant on the stone, round, and just as cold as the boy was. A plain black, but a delicate carving on its front. It felt almost familiar under his fingers, like he'd traced the same pattern 100 times in the darkness, with Kia's warmth tucked up next to him. Hakoda's hands stilled. He threw back the sheets and stood, and took the boy's wrist with him. The blue pendant dangled between them. He wanted to see it again, wanted to see it so badly, but not wrapped around a firebender's wrist like a fondly remembered trophy. Chief, Kusta said, rising. That's my mother's necklace, Kia's necklace, Katara's necklace. Where did you get this? Katara, who they left at the south 2 years ago, to try and keep safe. The Fire Nation had been to their home some time between then and now. The prince of the Fire Nation had been to their home. How many warships did Ozai allow his son? How big of a name could a prince make for himself at court with exaggerated tales of subduing the last southern water tribe? How long ago had it been, and why hadn't Hakoda been there to stop it? Chief, Kusta said carefully, you can try and get answers from him, or you can try and keep him alive. You can't have both right now, and I don't think you'll be happy with the answers you get while he's like this. He'd pulled the boy off the bed. He was kneeling in a tangle of furs that had fallen with him, not fighting Hakoda's grip on his wrist, head bowed as he muttered something fast and steady and practiced as a prayer. No. No.
Oh. Oh. My boy.
My boy. My boy. Fatherly panic indeed. Oh. 2 volcanoes, babes.
Yep. The grip on Zuko's wrist was grinding his bones together, and he couldn't remember what he'd done to make Father angry. This God. Oh.
No, these first 2 chapters are so much.
There's so much.
My boy.
He'd gotten so much better at hiding his swords, and he hadn't missed any lessons, and Father shouldn't be here, should he? He sent Zuko away. Didn't matter. Uncle wasn't helping, but Uncle never helped against Father. He was always gone somewhere else, or he was in the audience watching, but he was never helping. Father was the Fire Lord, and Uncle was loyal, and that meant he knew his place, unlike Zuko. Zuko could never figure out what his place was. He was always bouncing off the edges, always needing to be taught so he could learn. Didn't matter.
No.
It was his fault. He knew it was his fault. But it seemed like the rules were always changing, and no one ever explained them to him, and he didn't know which ones he'd broken now. It never mattered. I'm sorry. I won't do it again. I didn't mean to disappoint you. I'm your loyal son.
No.
The grip on his wrist went blindingly tight for a white-hot moment, then loosened. Rough hands tore off the necklace he'd had wrapped around there. Why did he have a necklace there? Then he was free. He placed his hand on the ground, ignoring the way his wrist screamed at the weight being put on it, bowed properly, didn't look up. The last time he'd looked up, all he'd seen was fire, and he didn't want to see it again.
No!
My heart!
My heart so much. Also, yes, Uncle being replaced by Uncle 2.0, who doesn't let his nephew be burned. Like, can we just appreciate that Kusta stepped in and was like, hey, maybe this is not how we deal with children? Like, no tea,
Mm-hmm.
no shade. I mean, all tea. But Iroh, come on, man. Step it up.
Yes. And also, can we also appreciate? I mean, like, I don't know if everyone here who is listening has read up to where it's been updated, but Chief Hakoda's character growth.
Mwah, we love to see it.
Very good.
No spoilers. No spoilers, but
No,
we do
no
love.
spoilers. Just like the plot line. The plot's good. Plot is top notch.
We love that payoff.
Hakoda was not entirely certain he wouldn't murder the prince if he spent any longer in this room. Kia's necklace pressed a hard circle into his palm, cold as a grave. Oof. Yikes.
Ouch.
The boy bowed at his feet and spoke to him like Hakoda was his father. But what kind of father would want a son that cowered in fear? Fire Lord, of course. He was a vile man, raising a viper of a son. Healer Kusta's gaze flickered between the boy and Hakoda. There was no judgment on his face. It was more like he was waiting to see just what degree of mess he'd be cleaning off his floor. Hakoda let out a slow breath. Don't tell the rest of the crew he's himself. Not until we know more. Of course. And the prince? Do what you can. I have questions for him. Kusta waited until his chief had shut the door. Then he let out his own breath and crouched down. Come on, he said, wrapping an arm around the teenager. Back in you get. Guess it's my turn then, if I'm the only one that isn't about to strangle you. The prince let himself be guided back under the covers without any of his usual complaining. When Kusta slid in next to him, he got a firebender under a face, hiding a face in his shirt. The boy was shaking, not shivering. It wasn't a distinction Kusta was particularly fond of.
I'm not particularly fond of it either.
Nope.
No.
Not a fun distinction.
Hurt my heart. Do you want me to pick up?
Silence. Yes.
Yeah. Hakoda set the necklace on his desk next to the blank paper. After a moment, he'd tucked the paper away, so only the necklace remained. He'd only need to write his ozai if the boy lived. The boy would only live if he made it through his illness and through Hakoda's questions. It wasn't the kind of if he would waste ink on. Katara, Sokka, his mother, everyone in his village, everyone in all of their villages, as scattered and hidden as they were, he'd done this for them, left for them. He never thought they would leave him too. Well, you thought wrong. The boy lived. His temperature crawled steadily upwards throughout the day until it was back to normal, then higher to a firebender's, continued to spike overnight until he was feverish to the touch, then nearly untouchable. Healer Kusta hypothesized that they now had a feverish firebender on their hands. It was, hopefully, still within the bounds of normal for their kind. Oof, a feverish firebender on a wooden ship. Not a great combination. This did nothing to stop the escape attempts, which began promptly the moment Kusta left him alone to make his report.
Oh, I do love his escape attempts.
We do love the escape attempts.
We do.
Not only is he made of elbows, but he is also slippery. So there you go.
But also extraordinarily hot.
Yeah. He is truly Flameo Hot Man.
Oh my god. Big yike.
We love. Do you want me to start this one?
You started the last one, right?
I don't remember.
We're gonna go. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thoroughly
my
oiled.
memory is very bad, but I do remember this.
Guys, don't oil your firebenders. It's a bad idea. Could you imagine like a firebender oil fire? You just like you gotta put the lid back on that pot. Don't use water. That's a hot tip. It's also, a hot tip.
You could use sand would probably work, maybe.
Yeah, sand. Oh, make sure you have an earthbender on hand.
No, they're both on fire. It's a battle to see who can put the other one out faster.
What? Wait, hold on.
What?
Wait. Did I not kudos this? Literally,
Naomi!
Shame me
How
immediately.
dare you?
Oh
Shame!
no. Wow.
Shame on your mother and
Rip.
your father and your puppy too.
Everyone, all the shame. Oof. To be fair, I don't actually have a archive of our own
Oh,
account. I just like
you're
keep a
not logged
tab
in.
of this specific fic open on my phone at all times.
Okay. You know what? I'll let you live.
Just this once.
Just,
Okay.
you will have zero excuses in the future.
And the cat.
Let
yes.
it be known.
Excellent Mulan reference.
All right.
All right.
Chapter 3. The Fire Prince's skill set is highly suspect. The first escape was notable primarily because the Fire Prince was asleep for most of it. God, what a great opening line. Love it. So good.
Immediately, we are starting off with a bang.
We sure are. He vanished from the healer's room in the early morning. It took the better part of the day to find him, curled up under a tarp in the space between the ship's longboat and her whaler. Right up on deck, where he'd apparently gone in broad daylight, how no one had seen him doing that was a matter Hakoda was vocally interested in, to the deep consternation of the deck crew. There was more than a few crew members who wanted to show His Highness their displeasure at hours of searching wasted, but very few who would justify doing so when the target of their ire couldn't stay awake for even a short, friendly sort of beating.
Oh no.
Healer Kusa pissed at the boy's new bruises, tucked him back into bed, and made sure to lock the door on the occasions he was needed elsewhere. The prince didn't wake again until near sundown. He was precisely as alert as Kusta would expect of a firebender at that hour, particularly one who had almost died the day before, and who was doing his best to keep death on the table as a viable option. You're eating before you go back to sleep, Kusta said. The boy's glare would have been more intimidating without the blanket half pulled over his face. When he'd been hypothermic, he couldn't get out of that fur pile fast enough. Now that he was feverish, Kusta was surprised he hadn't dragged the whole mess with him on his escape attempt. You look nothing like my uncle. Never said I did. You still have to eat. There was grumbling as Kusta helped him set up, and scowling as he passed the tray over, and stiff-shouldered embarrassment as he helped the boy hold the bowl of soup so he didn't dump it over his borrowed shirt. Fire Nation teenagers, Kusta was learning, were both several degrees more prideful than Water Tribe warriors, and several sizes smaller. The boy was drowning in blue fabric. His Highness self-consciously slid a drooping shirt collar back up over his shoulder, and glared harder. The effect was ruined by the way he kept nodding off mid-glower. Kusta took the empty bowl away. Get at least a day's rest before you try that again, okay? Doctor's orders. Okay. Kusta was joking. Prince, turned out, was not.
Never.
The
Never
prisoner
joking.
Nope.
Not a single joke bone in that body.
Nope. Zero humor. It's why we love him.
Mm-hmm.
The prisoner had been out for a day, barely waking up when Kusta shook him for meals. The crew had rapidly adopted the habit of checking the knob on the healer's door every time they walked past, just to reassure themselves it was still locked. Sailor's superstition. The room had a porthole. This was not considered an issue until the ship's dog started barking. The isopup had been doing as isopups do, scuttling over the ship's sides, gnawing off barnacles by starlight, keeping a general watch out for sea slug termites and other unsavory characters that might need a mauling eviction from the woods. The Fire Prince had been doing as Fire Princes were not supposed to be capable of, in scaling a near sinless vertical wall. The Night Watch stared down, holding a lamp out to better see this thing they still didn't quite believe they were seeing. The dog continued to bark murder, ended irately, like he was perfectly entitled to be clinging to the side of their ship by his nails. The crew did not call the dog off. The isopup snapped at the kid's leg, taking a strip of fabric out of the boy's oversized pants. The Fire Prince scrambled upwards, moving not terribly slower than the many-legged pup, actually. He paused just below the rail, making his clear choice between the dog, the ocean, and the water tribesmen above. Ake went ahead and cut that choice short. He grabbed the kid by the scruff of his shirt and hauled him on deck, and, having learned this lesson back in the healer's room, rather efficiently pinned the kid's arms before he got the chance to inflict new bruises. One black eye had gotten him laughed at quite enough, thank you. When Hakoda reached the deck, the Prior Prince was either trying to get loose or just trying to avoid the dog snapping at his feet. How did he get out? Hakoda asked. The porthole, we think, Ake answered, keeping his arms tight as the kid bucked, bringing both of his legs off the ground. The isopup jumped after him, claiming another scrap of blue and a new line of red. Scuttles down, Hakoda ordered, which produced exactly 0 results. 2 years on the ship, and the dogs in Hakoda refused to call him by the crew's nickname. He whistled sharply, and the pup broke off with a last warning growl. The Fire Prince let his bare feet touch the deck again, sagging a little in Ake's arms, his eyes tracking the isopup as it proudly clack-trotted to Hakoda's side. He'd be less trouble with a broken leg, Chief, Ake said, with grim practicality. The prince took a moment to process this, panting in Ake's grip, his eyes darting between the unamused crewmen around him. My leg is fine, he said, in the moment before he got it. Hakoda reached down and thoughtfully scratched under Scuttle's head armor, like the good growly boy he was. He didn't generally favor child abuse as a first line of action, but Ozai's heir was hardly a child. His own nation had sent him into the field. He must be of age by their barbaric standards. Certainly old enough to understand that 2 escape attempts in as many days would have consequences. The prince's face twisted into an ugly snarl. You can't, you savages! At which point it became clear that he really had just been trying to dodge the dog earlier. This was him trying to get loose. Ake swore, doubling over his gut as the kid elbowed him, then slipped out of his oversized shirt and promptly took off across the deck. Where he thought he was going on a ship in the middle of the ocean, surrounded by more experienced combatants, Hakoda didn't know. He did know that a feverish teenager shouldn't be quite this adept at fending off multiple opponents, even if he was mostly dodging. And why a firebender's first thought was to try stealing Toklo's sword, Hakoda couldn't fathom. The prince was a slippery eel snake, and the whole affair looked more like a chaotic deck-wide scramble to not fall over than an actual fight. It was his own bending that did him in. Ake had him cornered against the rail. The kid shifted into a stance that every man here recognized, but all that came out of his fist was a puff of smoke and steam. Then he was falling over, his face flushed and eyes unfocused. Ake wasted very little time in wrenching the prince's arms back and pinning him down. The crewman cursed and grabbed the kid's discarded shirt, used it as a makeshift hand wrap to avoid touching the firebender's bare skin. The kid squirmed, trying to draw his legs up under him, like that would do anything to protect him, now that the rest of the crew were closing in. Chief, Ake asked. Hakoda was sorely tempted to nod, but the scene looked exactly like what it was, a group of grown men about to hurt a single, terrified boy. The boy might deserve it, but Hakoda's men didn't deserve a chief who would let them sink so low. When they went home, they still needed to be able to... I know! When they went home, they still needed to be able to look their own children in the eyes, still needed to know that their children were waiting for them. Bring him to my office, with his legs, please. He leveled a stare down at the prince. If you have enough energy for this, you have enough energy to answer my questions. They pressed the boy into the chair across from Hakoda's desk and left the 2 of them alone, save for the sound of a dog scratching under the door crack with his sharp forepaws. Hakoda crossed his arms, waiting for the prince to get his breathing back under control. It only took a few moments. He started some kind of deliberate breath control exercise and drew himself up in the seat as haughtily as if they'd scheduled this meeting in advance. He crossed his arms too, mirroring Hakoda. Hakoda promptly uncrossed his arms. What was your plan exactly? Plan? The prince echoed, taking him back in a way that thoroughly answered the question. He had the fever, Hakoda reminded himself, and a head wound. And he had my daughter's necklace. Where did you get this? He asked, with a tight nod towards the blue pendant on his salt-worn ribbon. It sat between them on the desk, a silent accusation. I didn't steal it. The passion behind the statement belonged to a conversation Hakoda wasn't privy to. The stupid waterbender dropped it on the prison rig. Hakoda's heart didn't stop at hearing waterbender and prison in the same sentence. It only felt like it should. Reality continued to move on, with little regard to how he felt. Is she alive? What? Yes. The boy's eyes unfocused a little, and his ever-present scowl slipped. I think she was sick, though. He said she was sick. He had frogs in his shirt? Why did he have frogs in his shirt? Hakoda didn't need Healer Kusta to tell him the boy was still delirious. That any answers he could get from this wouldn't be ones he was happy with. That she's alive shouldn't be the new rhythm his heart was beating to when the prisoner clearly didn't know what he was saying. Hakoda shouldn't get his hopes up over an enemy's fever dream.
I don't know why he's thinking that frogs in the shirt means a fever dream. I put frogs in my shirt all the time.
Yeah, I mean, like, that's... In the chat, tell me who puts frogs in their shirt regularly. Come on, this is a regular thing. This is ordinary.
Yeah, like, comment, and subscribe if you put frogs in your shirt, too.
Remember to hit the bell notification.
Ooh, frog eggs? Fancy.
What? Oh. What? Okay, what about tadpoles? Anyone for tadpoles? Fashion power move.
Passion power move.
Okay, all right. I love to hear it.
You love to hear it.
I love to know that we all like a little slime. Ooh.
Ew.
Never mind. Yeah, I said that.
Delete.
Instant regret. Moving on. You're going back to the healer's room, Hakoda said, and you're staying there, or there will be consequences. Am I clear? Prince had been sagging a little in his chair. He jerked back upright, slid his scowl back on, and refused to answer. Hakoda gripped him by the shoulder and marched him back to bed. They set a watch this time, in the room. Mostly, the unlucky crewman on the first shift watched the kids watch them back, tense under his blanket pile. Those eyes really were unnerving. No bending until your fever breaks. You'll fry your brain out, Healer Kusta said, changing the cloth on the prince's forehead. The first attempt at cooling him off had rapidly steam-dried in a manner Kusta found both unnerving and fascinating. No more escape attempts until then, either. Okay. It was understood by both parties that neither was joking.
Oh, Kusta, you thought you were gonna get a little sass, but he's just too honest, and that he really wants to get the fuck out. Zuko woke up and it was night, and he couldn't get a straight count of how many times the sun had risen and set between now and when he'd first been hauled onto the enemy ship, but he knew from the sweat on his clothes and the way he could count again that his fever had broken. There was still a guard in the corner of the room, one that looked unnecessarily awake for a teenager he thought was asleep, a teen who'd probably been asleep for a while? It had been bright through the porthole when the not-uncle-at-all doctor had last prodded him into sitting up for a meal. He was hungry, and too hot, and he could feel bruises he hadn't had after the Pohai stronghold, some of which he didn't remember getting. If Water Tribe hospitality included beating near-conscious prisoners, he needed to get off this ship before they realized he was healthy enough for more. Oh, Zuko. That was on you, bud. That's all you, bud.
That was so on you.
Oh, Zuko. He remembered very clearly their chief's threat. There would be consequences for his next escape. He remembered the man's cold blue eyes as he'd let Zuko think he'd allow his band of savages to break a prisoner's leg. He remembered the man himself nearly breaking his wrist before his feverish brain had even started trying to get him out of this. Zuko hadn't done anything. He'd just been laying here, sick, and the man had... Zuko had knelt before the enemy and begged, like the onerous exile he was. His arm was out of the blanket tangle, in front of his face. The bruise was a dark, irregular circle of black, fading to blue-green at its edges. The chief was not his father. Not yet.
Certainly true.
At this point in time, maybe.
Well, he's also very much not Ozai.
That's also very true. The third escape attempt was discovered at the changing of the guard on His Highness's room. The previous guard was out cold. His key had been taken and used to politely relock the door from the outside. Healer Kusta admitted the prince's fever had broken sometime between lunch and when he'd brought the kids dinner. He declined to report this to Hakoda immediately on the grounds of, he could use a light night's sleep before you kicked him around, Chief. They checked on the ship's boats first, all accounted for, no stowaways, which left them with exactly no idea of where to look next besides everywhere and thoroughly. 2 years at sea had them thinking their ship was small, cozy on the good days, cramped on the bad. All it took was one enemy on the loose to teach them how big it could be. How long had he had the run of the ship for? How much damage had he done? Hakoda was going to murder the prince after he got his answers, after they found him. Chief, Toklo said. Hakoda looked at him, and their youngest crewman subtly jerked his chin upwards. It took Hakoda's eyes a moment to adjust to the shadows of a dark sails against the stars, to the shadow that shouldn't be there. The prince was perched on the crossbeam of their main mast, as high as he could have possibly climbed. The fire prince was perched there. There was a firebender on their main mast. Hakoda was going to murder him. Right after he convinced the prince he wasn't going to murder him, and could he please come down without starting any fires up there, no matter what a good distraction they would be for an escape. The first of many.
And so it begins.
He's like a bird. He has his little perch, and that's where he goes when he wants to escape.
When he's feeling extra angsty.
Yeah, which is always. His nest. Yep. The crow's nest? Is that why they call it? No.
Got that?
Well, listen.
I'm listening.
I am a Dumbo. Do you want to pick up, or do you want me to keep going?
I can go.
Cool.
The plan was simple. Find a ship's boat, get it in the water, get as far away as he could before they noticed, fight as necessary. Simple plans died simple deaths. There were too many people by the boats, just casually keeping a ridiculously overstaffed watch, like they knew he'd go for those. Had he already gone for those? Then there was talking behind him, coming up the hallway. He was barely hiding in, and where could he hide on the Water Tribe ship? There wasn't any pipework in the ceiling or walls, just broken wood. No branching halls off to engineering and the officers' quarters and the mess halls, just this hall that had stairs down and stairs up, and he was already crouching at the top of the ladder. He couldn't remember it well, just impressions from when he'd been half drowned or fevered. But he knew the ship was small. How could he hide here? Maybe he should just jump back into the ocean before they noticed he was missing, put as much room between himself and the ship as possible. Maybe they wouldn't be able to find him on the deck, in the dark, and at least the ocean wasn't actively trying to hurt him. The waters were so cold his flames had guttered. He'd been so tired he could only sink, and he wouldn't even have his driftwood this time. The voices were coming up the stairs behind him. The deck crew wasn't watching, well, not close enough. Zuko didn't panic, he just took the only option possible, or the only option available, which is how he found himself halfway up the main mast, and how was he ever going to get down again without them noticing, and where could he even go from here? He allowed himself one quiet thunk of forehead on wood, and a last glance at the ocean. Then he climbed higher, hoping the sails would hide him, at least until he had a chance to think. The sails did not hide him. His escape had lasted approximately 5 minutes. He didn't remember, but he'd lasted far longer when he'd been running a fever.
Oh, no.
Testament to feverish Zuko, honestly.
Sometimes your fever dream plans are the best ones.
Clearly.
That's what I always say, listen to your fever dreams.
Oh, do you? Do you frequently have fever dreams, Naomi?
Don't let your fever dreams be dreams. You gotta make that into reality.
Live your fever dreams. Come on. It's some simple stuff. Hakoda set the men to filling as many water buckets as possible, just in case. Not that there was much they can do. If the prince started a fire at the top of their sails, Prince Zuko, he called, "We know you're up there. Come down." The prince did not reply. The shadow at the top of the mast shifted slightly. Part of Hakoda wished for more light so he could see the boy better. The rest of him was just as glad there was no flicker of flame up there. They could try shooting him down, Tulip said, except they didn't have any particularly talented shots in their crew, and they both knew it. Hakoda refrained from rubbing his temples where the crew could see. If you're not coming down, then I'm coming up, he called out. I just want to talk. He didn't sound very convincing, judging by the way Tuluk raised an eyebrow at him. In retrospect, he could have growled that last word a bit less. Hakoda let out a breath and started climbing into the highly flammable rigging, with none of his own hands free for weapons or even basic self-defense, as he climbed towards the firebender who held the high ground. Said firebender cautiously scooted aside to make room for him on the crossbeam. Adorable. Hakoda eyed this generosity with suspicion, which was returned with a surprisingly lucid glare. Hakoda wasn't used to seeing the prince looking particularly aware. He didn't find himself liking the change. Now the badger wolf pup looked ready to bite on purpose. The boy's whole body was tense, and those gold eyes were watching Hakoda's every move. He finished hauling himself up and asked the question he'd been dearly wanting an answer to since these little escape attempts began. What was your plan?
I'd like to make just a compilation of all of the animals that Hakoda compares Zuko to, like badger wolf pup.
God.
There's like viper badger.
Yes.
He's like, this is just a little growly they're just a couple of growly boys having a good time on the main mast.
Venom, apparently.
Yeah, really.
Very, very dangerous, but also extremely harmless.
Yep. Well, I like that he was more lethal when he was, like, delirious. Yeah. And now that he's, like, got the clear advantage, he's like, well, we could have a chat. This is fine. It's all good.
Because he's not actually a terrible human being.
That is true. That is true.
No more fight or flight. Or fight or swim. Flight or burn. I don't know.
I can pick up. Zuko hated that question and hated the way he had to stop himself from shouting, "I don't know, Uncle," back. It was a reflex. "To get off your stupid shit before someone kills me," he snapped instead. "That is not a plan, nephew," Uncle's voice whispered, as unhelpful as his advice always was. "No one is going to kill you, Prince Zuko," the chief lied, about half as well as Azula when she was 8. The words were sincere enough. Zuko could never tell from the words, but the warrior's eyes were glacier cold and unblinking, promising something very different. And Zuko was stuck up here on top of the stupid sail, and he was already getting cold in these ridiculously baggy clothes, and he couldn't stay up here, but if he came down, the man would be able to do whatever he wanted, would probably hurt him before he killed him, but because there wasn't anything kind in those eyes. I'm not even your enemy. I have my own mission. Just let me go. I swear on my honor that I won't report your position to the fleet." This wasn't his father, but talking to the man felt the same. His silence wasn't listening. It was waiting for Zuko to stack the kindling higher, and Zuko always did, because he was stupid and he didn't know what these men wanted him to say. Sokka had once broken Hakoda's favorite spear, hidden the pieces in a snowbank, and gamely tried to talk his way out of the blame. He'd been 7, and had been, apparently, arguing his case more eloquently than an actual prince. A prince who dared to use the phrase, "I'm not your enemy." Hakoda let the boy talk himself out, let the silence settle back over them. Yes, actual Sokka. Although I could imagine Sildricky / Scuttle / Sokka just like breaking something, and then the Isopuppy eyes. He's got it clutch.
He still would be arguing his case much better than Zuko.
Oh yeah, much better than actual Sokka.
For sure.
For sure. "Have you been to the South Pole, Prince Zuko?" Yes? Those gold eyes blinked. What does that have to do with anything was implied in his tone. Far be it for a prince to anticipate a common savage's fears. "With how many ships?" "Just the Wani," Zuko said, with the uncomfortable spinning feeling that they were having very different conversations, and if he didn't join the chief soon, he was going to fall. "Did you visit any villages?" "One," he said, his fingers digging into the wood of the beam below him because he didn't know where the trap was. "How many did you kill?" "How many... What?" Zuko dug in his fingers harder because it looked like the chief might forgo any planned torture and just shove him to his death right here. Why is my daughter in a Fire Nation prison, Prince Zuko? She did that to herself. That wasn't the right answer. That wasn't the right answer at all, and he should have known that, but he was always so stupid. Your Highness, Hakoda grit out. You are a valuable hostage. We will not kill you out of hand. It isn't necessary for you to lie. The Fire Prince jumped to his feet. At the top of the swaying mainsail with nothing to support him, 40 feet in the air. I'm not lying.
Zuko move.
Such a Zuko move. The height of drama, truly, in all respects.
Really?
Flames.
The drama queen.
Yeah.
Through and through.
Drama prince. Flames trailed his hands as he gestured, leaving sparks arcing in the night, which was alarming for entirely different reasons. My mission is to capture the Avatar, not to deal with Blackwood's Water Tribe savages. I wouldn't have even gone to that village if they weren't hiding him, and I didn't hurt anyone. I'm not like you. It was just a bunch of old people and children, and I don't try to stab people in the back when they're on their knees. I just scared them so they'd surrender to the Avatar. And they did, and I left, and I didn't even go back when the Avatar broke his word and escaped because I'm not a monster like you. Stop making up crimes for me in your head. Oof. What a monologue.
You get him, Zuko.
We shouldn't be having this conversation up here, Hakoda said, because he didn't know what else to say to a volatile teenager who might fall to his death at any moment, or light their ship on fire, and whose high fever may or may not have left him with permanent brain damage. The Avatar? Hiding in Hakoda's village? Centipedes? I'm not going to finish that, but you know. Never mind the boy's warped sense of justice. Comparing a Fire Nation soldier like himself to children who'd done no worse in their life than hide from soldiers. You're climbing down, Hakoda ordered, leaving no room for disagreement. Now, we will continue this discussion in my... No! The prince's voice was nothing but disagreement. I'm not going to let you break my leg, or whatever your consequences will be. You can't stay up here forever. Try me, the prince said, like a particularly stubborn toddler. I feel like, at some point, Hakoda should use, like, the dad, like, I'm gonna start counting. 1, 2, like, I don't remember if that actually happens, or if it's just in my mind.
I don't think so.
No.
I think you're making this up, Naomi.
No, I'm making it up, but
Like
I would love
fanfic.
to. That is my favorite part of my head world. The boy was clutching his wrist, but his own hand was smaller than Hakoda's had been, and it couldn't hide the bruise underneath. Climbing up here hadn't been an attempt to get leverage. If it were, the prince would have tried to use it by now, would have threatened their ship. The boy had simply treed himself like a panicked raccoon kitten. Mark that one down. And was too scared of the warriors below to come back down. My men won't hurt you. You have my word. And what about you? The boy asked, his own grip too tight over that bruise. Answer my questions and I won't have to. The prince's jaw tightened. He tilted up his chin. I'm not going to tell you anything about the Fire Nation. I'm more interested in the South Pole, Hakoda answered, and my daughter. Well, I'm not going down first. Which appeared to be as close to assent as Hakoda was going to get. He started climbing, a few moments later, leaving a generous gap between them. The prince followed. Hakoda, he's definitely pulled that with Sokka and Katara.
Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Just busting out the dad voice.
A whole dad voice. Okay. The whole crew was staring and silent and ringing them in. Zuko was hesitant to step on deck again before the ship's dog came bark charging at him. Zuko was halfway up the mast again before the chief pried the dog's sharp, insectile legs off the wood and stopped it from chasing him. Someone on the crew laughed. It was a too loud, incredulous sound, clearly directed at him. And if Zuko ever found out who did it, he was going to light something on fire. He glared at each of the men below him individually. It's safe to come down now, Your Highness, the chief said, holding the growling, many-legged, scrabbling dog under one arm. He sounded amused. I know that, Zuko snapped, and let his grip slip so he came down fast in the way that always made Uncle shout, Please use the ladder rungs, nephew. They are not there for decoration. The Water Tribesmen flinched at the speed just as much as the Wani's deck crew always did. Zuko crossed his arms and raised his chin, and tried not to think of how much taller than him they all were. It wasn't that people in the Fire Nation were short, and Zuko was a perfectly average height for his age, and anyways, he was expecting a growth spurt soon, but these barbarians were unnecessarily large. The chief looked down at him, and it wasn't even like he was trying to. He was just too big. Right this way, Your Highness, he said, with a slight bow to further mock formality. Let's talk. Zuko followed, stiff-backed, with only one glance towards the sea. He had the chief's word he wouldn't be hurt. The word of a savage, a leader, and a father. It was too late to jump in the ocean now.
The Hakoda has arrived.
The Hakoda is on scene. Okay. I think I am Read-Aloud out for tonight.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it's probably time to skedaddle. But this was super fun, and thank you guys for joining us.
Yes, I'm so happy people showed up.
Yeah.
And listened to us be dumb. And struggled to words.
Yeah. Words, they're hard, but we get through them together. That's what friends are for. Yeah. So we're thinking we might do this again next week around the same time. We want to work through the whole Salvage, and then after that, I don't know, we were thinking of maybe if people have any fic recommendations that they want to hear us read aloud as well and come hang out, we're happy to take them. Just send them to us on Tumblr, or we're also on Twitter.
We do have some requests if you do send fic recommendations. Number one is nothing too weird. We're trying to make this semi child friendly with the occasional swear tossed in, but nothing too weird. No smut. We're not gonna read anything too spicy. What was our last thing? No real people.
Yeah. No,
for fictional characters only.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fictional stories only.
Yeah. And we'd be down to hear what other fandoms you guys are in. Things that we're into are Haikyuu, Friends at the Table, Adventure Zone, the Balance arc particularly. She-Ra, definitely. I'm into Devilman. That's a little bit more spicy. So I don't know. It might be hard to find any general rated fics. I do have a friend who's an author of a couple that I might want to read, but yeah. Ooh, My Life as a Villainess. We'll have to check that out.
Ooh, I have not heard of this, but this sounds fun.
Yeah, definitely. Awesome. Well, cool. Thanks for joining. Have a great evening, everyone. Sleep well if it's that time zone.
What? I just wanted to say, feel free to come chat with us. Chat with Naomi on Tumblr and me on Twitter, because those are the platforms we individually know.
Yep, yeah. It's Nomiomi on each. All right. Yeah. Good night. Sleep well.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.